Hello ctrlX fans, this is Sam Gilk with Botfexrop. Today I'm going to be walking through setting up some remote access to ctrlX OS devices using the IXON Cloud Connector application. I'll be covering the standard package, but there are some additional features available on paid plans through IXON, such as alarms, notifications, data logging, and visualization. So with that, let's get started. In this first section here, we're going to cover the installation of the application and registering of the device within the IXON Cloud Portal. So the first step here is going to be creating an IXON Cloud account. I'm going to open a new tab and Google IXON Cloud. And the first link here is going to bring me to the IXON Cloud website. I'll select Login. And then I'm able to log in if I have an existing account or create an account here. From there, I just follow the registration instructions provided by IXON. Since I already have an account, I'm going to go ahead and log in. And I'll stay logged in. And this is going to bring me to the IXON Cloud Portal landing page. As you can see, I have no devices listed here, and that's because we haven't registered any. So the next step is going to be actually installing the IXON Cloud Connector application on our ctrlX OS device, and then registering it here in the IXON Cloud Portal. So one thing I'm going to need is my company ID that's provided here under my account information. So I will copy that. And now I'm going to navigate to my ctrlX OS device web UI. So initially, you will need to be networked directly with your ctrlX OS device so that you can install the IXON Cloud Connector application and register it in the IXON Cloud Portal. So the first step is going to be installing the IXON Cloud Connector application. Under Settings, I'll select Apps, and that brings me to my Apps page. I'll then select Install from File, and then select my IXON Cloud Connector application. This should also be available on the ctrlX store. So I'll go ahead and install the application. This may take a minute. All right, so it looks like the app installed successfully. And now you should see this menu item listed in the web UI, IXON Cloud Connector. So I'll go ahead and select Register IXON Cloud Connector. And it looks like it's still initializing here. So don't worry if you see this screen, that's perfectly normal. The app might just be still booting. So I'll give it another minute here while it is initializing. So once the app is fully initialized, I should be brought to this page here, which is the IXON Cloud Connector registration page. It's going to ask for my company ID, which I've already copied, but again, I'll come back to my IXON Cloud Portal, and you can find that under the account menu here. So I'll copy this company ID, come back to my ctrlX Core registration page, and then I'll paste that here. Sometimes this register button takes a few attempts, so don't be alarmed if it doesn't take right away. So there we go. Now the registration has gone through, and if I come back to my IXON Cloud Portal, I'll then select the Fleet Manager application from this menu here. And inside my Fleet Manager, I should now see that I have one new device. If I select this, you can see it's a ctrlX core, and it should have the serial number of the ctrlX core that I've registered. So at this point, I can activate this device in my IXON Cloud account. So I will give it a name. And you can also initialize the device configuration from a template if you have one. But because this is going to be a tutorial, we're going to start with no template. And you can also add this device to a specific group. So this is part of the user management and access control functionality of IXON Cloud. You can have specific devices within certain groups that only those groups would have access to. For now, I'm going to not place it in any group, and I'll activate this device. Okay, so the device is successfully activated. Now that my ctrlX core has been activated within the Fleet Manager of the IXON Cloud, I can configure it using the Fleet Manager application. So if I select my device, I'm first brought to the Information tab. And here I can view some general information about the device. I can add a description, location. I can add access groups. I can see which users have access to this device, as well as some hardware and firmware information. But what we're really interested in for remote access is going to be the network configuration. So I'll select the Network tab here, then LAN, and I'm asked to add a router LAN IP address. So the IP address I'm going to use here is going to be the external IP address of my ctrlX core that has internet access. So if I come back to my ctrlX core, my XF10 network interface is routed through a router and provided internet access. So I'm going to grab the static IP address here. I'll use that as the router LAN IP address and then provide a network mask as well. So now that this is added, I should be able to access the device remotely, but I will only have access at this point without the use of a VPN to 3 services that IXON provides. Those are VNC servers, HTTP servers, and WebSocket servers. The ctrlX OS hosts an HTTP server for its web UI. So I'll go here and add an HTTP server service, and I will just call this ctrlX Web UI. And again, I can add a service group if I'd like. For now, I'll leave this blank. We use an HTTPS connection on the ctrlX core, and the IP address is just going to be the local host with the 443 HTTPS port. And next, I can provide a route. If I leave / that's going to bring us to the default landing page of the ctrlX core, which is what I want in this case. But for example, you could provide a route to the network manager if you'd like. You can also password protect these services, but because our ctrlX core is already password protected, I will leave that blank here. And finally, I'm asked to provide an access category. IXON gives you a default access category, category A. Later in the video, we'll go through the user management and access control, but for now, I'll use the default settings. Next, I'll add this service, and we can see that the ctrlX Web UI HTTP service was added to our IXON Cloud device. So in order to test this, I'll go to the Portal application, select my ctrlX Core X3, and I'm brought to the landing page of the device. Now, under Web Access, you can see we have the ctrlX Web UI service. We are not connected to VPN currently, and if I select this service, I should be brought to the home page of the ctrlX Core device. And like we mentioned, we are already password protected here. And I can log in and access my landing page through the HTTP service. You can see that this is the same as my locally networked device, but through an HTTP service. In the next section, we're going to cover the VPN connection, which will allow us to access internal network devices. Now, in order to access devices that are internal to the ctrlX OS machine network, we're going to need to perform some additional configuration within the IXON Cloud as well as on the ctrlX device itself. We may also need to configure the gateway address within those internal devices. Alternatively, we can utilize the firewall application on the ctrlX OS device to provide some routing rules that will allow us to access those without setting a gateway address. So, as an example, I'm going to walk through this architecture here. So we've already set up our XF10 network interface, which has allowed us to access the ctrlX core device. Now we want to access devices that are networked on a separate subnet off of the XF51 interface of the ctrlX core. So here's the architecture we're going to be working with. In the example, I'm going to show how to connect to an Allen Bradley PLC here. So here we have the IP address of the Allen Bradley PLC, we have the subnet mask, and we have the gateway address, which, if you notice, is the address of the XF51 network interface. This doesn't have to be set, like I said, if we utilize the firewall application. So I'll show both of these configurations in the example ahead. So moving back to the IXON Cloud, we'll start here. The first step will be to open again this device within the Fleet Manager. And I'm going to go to the network settings, LAN, and I'm going to add an additional subnet here. So now this new network address is going to be the internal network interface or XF51 subnet. And the gateway address is going to be the XF10 IP address or the external subnet. So now that we've added this, we should be able to go to our ctrlX core, come over to our network interfaces, select XF51, and make sure that our IP address is set as we configured it in the IXON Cloud. And additionally, we need to make sure that IP forwarding is enabled. So at this point, we should be able to establish a VPN connection. And we can do that by coming back to the Fleet Manager and selecting Connect here. You can also do this within the IXON Cloud Portal here, the Portal application. You can select the VPN Connect option. So when you first connect here, it's going to prompt you to install the VPN client that IXON utilizes on your PC. So I already have this installed. So if I hit Connect, you will see this status below. Okay, now that we are connected to the VPN, you can see that this status icon has shown a blue bar and that we are connected here. All right, so now I'm going to go to my Studio 5000 project that's running on my Allen Bradley PLC, and I'm going to configure the device. So currently it's networked differently than shown in the image. I'm going to put it back on 2.20 as its address because I'm going to actually pause the video here and swap the Ethernet cable so that it is networked on the XF51 ctrlX core interface. I'm also going to set the gateway address here to the XF51 static IP address. Now, once I have this set, I'll no longer be able to communicate with the Studio 5000 project until I actually swap that Ethernet cable. so that the architecture is as shown in the PowerPoint image that I showed at the beginning of this section. So I will do that, and then I will pause and actually swap the cable. So I've gone ahead and made that Ethernet cable swap, and now I'm able to connect to the Allen Bradley PLC at the 2.20 IP address. So this is only due to the fact that I have a VPN connection through IXON, and the Allen Bradley PLC is now connected to my XF51 network interface of my ctrlX core, which is on the 2.1 subnet. So I should be able to select that communication path and go online with the controller through the IXON Cloud remote connection and through the ctrlX core routing. And there we go. I'm now connected to this PLC and I'm able to program as usual. Now that we understand how you can connect to an internal network device by setting that device's gateway address, let's go ahead and demonstrate how we can do this using the firewall application on the ctrlX core. Before we go ahead and do that, I want to show a common pitfall when trying to access internal network devices remotely over the IXON Cloud, and that is just being disconnected from the VPN. So I've gone ahead and disconnected from the device VPN in my IXON Cloud Portal, and now I'm going to try and establish a connection to that device. And you'll see that it fails to connect to this device and eventually times out here. So we'll wait a few seconds so we can see this failure. Okay, now if I go back to my IXON Cloud and reconnect the VPN, this will also take a few seconds. Now I'm connected, and I'll go back to my Studio 5000 project here, which is being hosted on an internal device to my ctrlX core network. I'll try and go online, and we'll see that we're able to establish this connection over the VPN. All right. So this is the gateway setting method. Now let's say that we don't want to have to configure the gateway setting on all of these internal devices. To show that, I'll go ahead and once this is fully connected here, I'll go ahead and configure the Ethernet adapter on this Allen Bradley PLC to remove the gateway setting. I'll come over to my Internet Protocol settings. And I'm just going to remove this gateway address to the default. And we'll see here that as soon as I apply this, we're going to lose connection to this device. So I'm not going to sit here and wait around for this to time out. It takes a little while, but while we're waiting, I'll go ahead and start setting up this source network address translation within the ctrlX core firewall. So I'll come back to my ctrlX core web UI, open up our firewall settings. And the type of rule we're going to use here is source NAT. I will come down to the source NAT configuration. And we're going to add an IPv4 source NAT rule. So I'm just going to append this to the default chain. There's going to be another tutorial on firewall coming. We're not going to go into too much detail here. So I'm going to add a rule to the default chain, and we'll just call this PC to PLC. I'm then going to add a couple of expressions here. The first one is going to be match packet payload, and I want my destination address to match the IPv4 address of my PLC. You can also specify a range here so that you don't have to target a specific device if you want the whole subnet, for example. So that's the first rule, and the next one is going to be the source NAT expression. And we want to translate this to our X51 network interface static IP address and across all ports. We're not going to specify any. Okay. Now I'm going to apply that rule. Save the firewall configuration. I'll come back to the Allen Bradley PLC project, and we can see by now the communications have timed out because we did not have a proper gateway configuration. But since we've added this source NAT rule within our ctrlX core firewall, we should now be able to go online because the ctrlX core is handling that routing. And there we go. We were able to establish a connection to the internal network device using a source network address translation that's being handled on the ctrlX core. The last piece I'm going to touch on is IXON Cloud's extensive user management and access control system. In order to view these features, you can come under Apps and select Admin. And the two we're going to be interested in are roles and groups. We'll start with groups. So the first thing we're going to want to do is select more options here and then manage the groups. And here we can edit the group types. So we'll add a new group type and we'll call this group admin. Then within each group type, we can add groups. So we'll call this customer 1. And we'll just edit the default group to customer 2. Then we can do the same thing for our admin group type. Next, we'll take a look at the roles. So underneath our roles, we have a number of default roles. But if we select add a new role, we can apply this role as company-wide, which means it has access to every device and group and template on the IXON Cloud account, or it can be specific to a certain group or even at the device level. So we'll call this role test, and we'll make it a group-specific role. Depending on the scope of the role, there are different permissions associated with it. I'm not going to go through each of the permissions. The documentation on IXON is pretty good. So we'll make this a group-specific role, and we'll just say it can do a couple of these permissions. The next piece here is access categories. There's one by default, which is category A. If you remember, when we were setting up our HTTP server service, we assigned that as a category A access category, because it was the only one available, but we can add additional ones here, for example, category B. And then we can see when we're editing our roles, there are now permissions associated with that category. So now that we have some groups and roles made, let's go back to our fleet manager and see how these can be assigned to certain configurations on the device. We'll open up our ctrlX Core X3, and under Info, we can see the two groups. Then we can assign certain groups within that group type. So let's say this one, customer 1 group would have access to this device and both admins, for example. If we come back to our ctrlX Web UI service, we can see that we have the ability to assign category B as the access category. We'll leave it with category A for now. Now, the next piece is going to be actually inviting users to access these these different devices within our fleet. So to do that, we'll come back to our IXON Cloud Portal. And under Users on the left-hand side, we can invite users. Here we provide an email. We can send them a message. And then we can assign different roles and access levels to this user. We can say we want a group-specific role. We want this user to be in customer 1, for example, and they can be the customer role or the test role that we created. So we'll just give them the test role. And then we can send that invite to that user, and then they would be able to access the different devices and administration privileges that are associated with their configured access control. So if there's a ton of more documentation on the IXON website, it's very extensive and walks through how to do all of this and explains each permission. So with that, thank you all for listening, and I hope that this video was helpful.